Welcome to TORAH Talk. I am your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with the brand new pilot possible miniseries with Shlomo Phillips on world religions. Shlomo, it's been a long struggle getting this thing going, but I think we finally pulled it off.
Baruch Hashem.
Yes, indeed. Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. My. I'll spare everybody all the gory details, but boy, I tell you what, it was a challenge. Glad to be back, for sure. Glad to have you here. So I guess before I get too far ahead of myself, and because knowing me, I would just jump right into this whole world religion thing. But realistically, I want to introduce you to the TORAH Talk viewing world, and just tell us a little bit about yourself, and why you're doing what you're doing, and also you can include your other projects as well, as far as your work with the Noahide, the whole Noahide coverage and things like that as well. Mention your websites and so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm Shlomo Phillips. I am the owner and main author of allfaith.com. And back in 1969, I began my quest for truth. And I won't bore you with all the details right now, but my path led me to studying the world's religions. I got a master's in religious studies. I got various ordinations and the equivalent of shmikas from various places, trying to just find out what the truth was. And so for me, it wasn't really an intellectual, academic pursuit. I wanted for my own soul to know the truth. And so I started looking really for me. While I was in college, one of my professors suggested that I should put some of the papers I was writing online. And that's sort of how I ended up starting All Faith back in 97, 98. And I've been basically sharing my perspectives ever since. I have a regular schedule on my Facebook wall. We're on Sundays at noon and Thursdays at noon in the Eastern time zone, where we're studying a couple of different books. Elie Wiesel on Sunday, his Soul's on Fire. And then on Thursdays, Rabbi Shalom Arush's wonderful book, In Forest Fields, which is sort of the secret to doing Hit Butter Doot. I am basically a Breslaver. I'm a member of Der Altvig Hasidus, which means the old-time Hasidus. We try to get back to sort of the roots of the Bel Shem. And that's sort of what we do. I broadcast and I share and I answer questions online to my Facebook, to my website, and so on.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it seems like you've definitely been around the studio idea for quite some time. I mean, as I was mentioning to you, the struggles I was having, you said, I got it, I understand.
Oh, I understood that completely. Believe me.
Wow. Well, it's good. It's good to have you here. You know, it's something that people ask me from time to time. What does this religion think? What does that religion think? And so my whole thought process. This is a little. Like I said, it may be a mini-series. Maybe we'll just highlight some stuff tonight, and if we have enough viewers, enough likes, we'll break down what we talked about tonight into different segments until we've covered them all in further detail. So, but for me, I was very curious because I didn't know what Buddhists think, I didn't know what Hindu was, or all these others, and I definitely want to talk about the ones that you've experienced with. And I'm glad you actually were not approaching it from an academic standpoint. I'm glad you were searching for it. Because to me, that just means that you were really searching about it with more of an open mind rather than being doing it from a one-sided perspective. That's actually the perspective I want to hear. I want to hear what you learned as a person seeking to find out if that was the true path or not. So, and I think that's going to be information that a lot of people will find very useful. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, I know we're talking about world religions, but Rebbe Nachman of Breslov just really speaks to me like no one else. And Rebbe Nachman said, no sophistication is needed in serving God. Only simplicity, sincerity, and faith. Simplicity is higher than all else, for God is certainly higher than everything else, and God is ultimately simple. So my question has always been, since the beginning of time, average people have been simple. You know, they went out and they farmed, they worked, they did whatever they did, and they were basically simple people. And when those people had the time to relax and they pondered the big questions, they didn't ponder it by taking out tomes of Talmud studies and digging through the minutia possibilities, as wonderful as that is. Those people looked up into the heavens and asked why and what. And those people got some solid answers. And I wanted to know what those answers were. And so I looked at the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Shintos and the Jains and the Christians, of course, and the Muslims and the Zoroastrians and the ancient Sumerians and all kinds of different places. Because I thought if I could understand their questions, not necessarily always their answers, but if I could understand their questions, it would have to give me some light.
Sure.
And that's really what I wanted, was light.
Awesome. Well, real quick, just because I'm gonna let you start actually where you had intended on starting, but during your search before you chose your path now, you mentioned Christianity as one of those you searched out. Tell me what was the most enticing and convincing thing that they offered you?
I think one thing that Christians do better than probably anyone else, maybe except Muslims, but probably better than anybody else, is that when you get a hold of sincere, dedicated Christians, people, Pentecostals, people like the Baptists, people like the Foursquare Christians, these people worship God in their services. If you go to our synagogues, a lot of times we're reciting text, but we don't normally have that sense of actual worship. And to me, that was the strongest thing about what I would call observant Christianity, which in its various myriad formats, Christianity has so many denominations, but the Christian people know how to pray, the observant ones, and they believe in God, and they believe in God with all of their hearts. And when they're praying, they're pouring their spirit into it. They're pouring their souls and their hearts into it. To me, there had to be something there for people to be that intense in their worship.
Okay. What were you exposed to multiple types of Christian churches, or was it just one mainly?
Oh no, yeah, I studied. I received an ordination from two ordinations actually from the Baptist.
Wow.
I studied with the Seventh-day Adventist. I studied deeply with Jehovah's Christian Witnesses. I studied with the Pentecostals and various types of Holy Rollers. I studied with just all kinds of Christians, Church of God, Church of Christ, and so on.
Gotcha.
I have a pretty broad experience of Christianity.
I guess the reason why I asked it that in that manner is because I too have been like, I guess you could say, not really members, but I've been part of different types of churches, and of course I was a Christian pretty much most of my life. Began teaching as well, and they go through the motion of prayer, and so I guess this is kind of where my thoughts may differ from yours a little bit, but we may be thinking the same thing, but maybe we're just describing it differently. But they get involved in their prayers more, but the big issue is that I don't think they understand that in their motions they're not praying to God, they're addressing it around about, but they're using this man figure as their focal point, and so
right. And see, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
You probably needed to.
Well,
go ahead.
That was one of the biggest crux of my seeking. What does it mean to worship God? Christianity really stresses the importance of God said it, I believe it, that settles it, especially in some of the more fundamentalist sects.
Well, I've heard that. Name it and claim it.
Right.
Grab it.
And so
yeah,
what I wanted to know was exactly what you're saying was you have created the standard. God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Right. What did God say?
Right.
Well, God said that God is Echad. I mean, God says he is Echad. He's one. He's not three.
Right.
God says that he gives salvation based on genuine teshuvah of the heart. the sacrificial requirements of the Torah are not actually for our salvation. The sacrifices were to show our sincerity in our need and desire for the teshuvah.
Right.
And finally, it got to the point where Hashem said, "You know what? Your sacrifices are making me sick. I don't want that. Take that away." So then I said, "Well, all right, then let's look at Jesus."
Okay.
All right. So here you got this guy, and I just forget everything up until the point of his death.
Okay.
All right. So here you got a guy who the Christians say was sacrificed. All right. Fair enough. What is a sacrifice under Jewish law? A sacrifice has to be performed within the temple precincts. Yeshua was sacrificed, quote, outside of the city, according to the Gospels. The sacrifices have to be overseen by a priest. There were no priests at Golgotha. The Torah specifically forbids human sacrifices, so even if you believe in the Trinity, you still believe that Jesus was, quote, very God and very man, so that man part was being sacrificed in violation of Torah. There's so many things about the crucifixion, plus the fact that he wasn't crucified according to the New Testament. He died on a stake.
Right.
He would have died impaled instead of this way. The cross was a sacred symbol of the god Sol Invictus, who is the principal god of Constantine. And that's where so much of this symbolism came in from. But so I started thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to believe what the Christians tell me, I have something to base the belief on, and that's what does the Torah say? What does it not say? It says in Acts, I think it's 11, that the people of Berea were more righteous than the Thessalonians because they heard what Paul said. They listened to him eagerly, and then they checked the Tanakh to see if it was true.
The Bereans, yeah.
Well, it's not true. It violates the Tanakh.
Right.
But they do have a zeal for God. They do have a desire for God. They absolutely have a sincerity in their belief. And I believe that God looks at the heart, not to say that's the true path.
Right.
But God looks at the heart.
Right. And just before we shift on that completely, I've been to a few Orthodox synagogues and to their during the time they're doing their prayers and stuff. And the way I would describe the difference between what's happening in a synagogue versus what's happening in a church is the emotions that I see, the connection that people do in a church when they're praying and they're crying out, and they're doing all this other stuff. This may sound pretty far-fetched, but I believe it 100%. It's so close. What they do in the church is so incredibly close to the same thing that the crowd would do at a Bon Jovi concert. They're so engulfed, and I'm not joking. They will cry.
No, you're right.
They will get emotionally wrapped up in the presence of their Bon Jovi God at the time. Hey, I love Bon Jovi. I'm not dissing them. I'm just saying the idea of a comparison. But in the synagogue, I got a different feel. Was that their focus was completely channeled directly towards Hashem, and it was 100% dedicated. I mean, they were davening like I was going to say like madmen, but not like madmen at all, but just they were very serious and very focused on what they were doing. So to me, I would say, I think my experiences may have been the opposite, and maybe just because you and I come from different backgrounds and we perceive things differently along the way. But I think overall we both agree for sure that Christianity is not the path that Torah teaches, and ultimately that's why you left. So that's pretty.
Oh yeah, no. Christianity clearly is not the path of the Torah. And by the way, I did not in any way mean to be negative about the way that we worship as Jews.
Oh right, I see.
But the reason that we like Bon Jovi, and the reason that when we get something like Bohemian Rhapsody, we all start rocking out, right? The reason we do that is because we're all craving joy. Rabbi Nachman said, how can you tell if a man loves God? He'll have joy in his heart. It'll make a difference in his life.
Right.
We want joy. We want happiness. We want to connect. And every religion in part seeks to present that to us. The difference, I think, with Orthodoxy is that in our services, we are very much focused on the text, understanding the sacredness of the Torah and our text. And so we're trying to really bathe our consciousness in the truths of Torah. That is a different approach, and obviously, I think it's the best approach.
Right.
But you asked what I thought I saw about Christianity that I admired, and that
I see what you mean. So at the
their
time,
joy and their worship, I admire.
I gotcha. So it was kind of more of at the time when you were searching. That's what really drew you. That makes perfect sense. Because I was actually
Yeah.
quite amazed by that as well. I mean, especially the churches that I had gone to, they were like, "Wow, man, these people really know how to do it."
Yeah.
So
And I
okay,
don't think, by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with having a good time.
right,
When I leave the shul, I hope I'm going to feel better than when I went to the shul.
right, right. That would be a nice,
I think that's part of it.
a nice positive outcome for sure. Okay, so let's go ahead and skim forward. I know I derailed you like right off the bat by drawing you right into that, but obviously for obvious reasons. But so if you want, just take a few minutes and just kind of literally a few minutes, and we can double back. But I'm afraid if we land too long on one, like I kept you on this topic for probably too long for this particular show. But let's just try to cover as much ground as we can, say in the next 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes, and see what we can cover on the different types of religions that you've come in contact with and what we may be discussing in future shows.
Well, I as far as flickering around, that's sort of what I do. I have no agenda particularly except whatever I'm here for, and that's to discuss different religions.
Okay.
So the religion that really appealed to me, or one of the religions that I really tried to study early on, I started studying it when I was about 17, was what at the time I wrongly referred to as Hinduism. There is actually no religion called Hinduism.
Really?
In India,
how about that?
there was a concept called Sanatan Dharma. Sanatan Dharma means universal truth. The Muslims who were living in Afghanistan would look over towards India, and it was bounded by the Sindhu River. And so they referred to the people on the other side as the Sindhus, except Arabic doesn't have an S, so they called them the Hindus.
Really?
That's where you get the word out.
How about that?
So, Sanatana Dharma is actually comprised of the Shaivites, the Vaishnavas, the Daivas, just so many different sects. And greater Hinduism is really as even more diverse than Christianity is. It's very, very diverse in their belief systems. And so you can't really generalize about what quote unquote Hindus believe because it's very, very diverse. And then Buddhism, of course, sprang out of there when, as a young man and the child of a very, very wealthy family, Gautama was living in a palace, and at his birthday, there was a chart done on him, an astrological chart. And the chart said, your son will either become one of the greatest religious figures in the world or one of the greatest political rulers in the world. His father, being a political ruler, wanted his son to be a great political ruler. So he said, well, how could I keep him from becoming a great religious ruler? And the seer said, well, if he ever sees death, aging, or sorrow, I believe that was the three, then he'll become a great religious teacher. So his father built huge walls around the palace, hired so many beautiful young women to take care of the child. No aging, no hardships, no sorrow was allowed. And Gautama, after a while, began wondering what it was like outside the walls. And so he started wanting to go out. So the king would go and he would have one street totally cleansed of old people, of beggars, of poverty-stricken. And they would freshly paint the buildings, and they would take him on these beautiful elephants. And he could go down that street and then back into his compound. Well, one day, and I'm sort of generalizing the topic for time here,
Sure.
but one day he slipped off of an elephant and went running back through the alleys, and he began seeing people who had poverty, people who were dying, people who were in these terrible situations. And whatever it was in him that clicked, and he decided that he wanted to know the truth of God, or the truth, whatever that meant. Now, remember, he was raised as a Brahmanic Hindu, so he knew all the deities, all the Murti of the Indians, but he didn't really have any kind of a direct realization of spirituality. So at one point, he decides that he's going to cast off everything. He goes out naked, he sits in the middle of a field, and he simply sits there in full lotus position and says, I'm going to sit here until I get enlightened or until I die. He sat there so long that the snails crawled up him and began making caps for him so the rain wouldn't pelt him, to protect him. That's why you so often see the Buddha with the snail caps on.
Interesting.
And as he's sitting there, he hears a boat going down the river, and he's listening to the boat. And there's two people on the boat. There's a teacher and his student, his Tela. And so the teacher says, I want you to string this vina. And the student starts trying to do it. And he says, don't make the string too tight or it will break, but don't make it too loose or it won't produce a clear sound. And the Buddha had his enlightenment. If you are too ascetic, if you are too other, you will break. You won't be able to maintain that. But if you're too lax in your life, you also won't be able to attain spirituality. And so the Buddha developed his Four Noble Truths and so on to form that particular religion. So those are two of the big ones, I think, that really matter. About the same time as the Buddha, there was a man named Lao Tzu who was living over in China. And Lao Tzu was a very, very wise man, and people always went to him with questions. He also worked, I think he worked at a tax station or something. I've forgotten exactly what he did for a living. But he's very, very wise. One day, Lao Tzu realizes that his time on the earth is over, so he's going to leave. So he's leaving the city, and he gets to the city gates, and the guard says, it's almost dark. Where are you going? He says, I'm basically going to go off and die now.
Wow.
So they say, wait. Before you go, we want to interview you and get your wisdom. That wisdom is what is recorded in the famous scripture called the Tao Te Ching. And so in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu conceives that there is yin, there is yang. There is black, there is white. There is positive, there is negative. It's essentially Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. Mm-hmm. And he says that where Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara, he didn't use that language, but where these dualities merge together, there is Tao. Tao is the unification of the two polar opposites.
Wow.
And so Taoism was formed. In other sections, especially around the Himalayas, the people who had been studying the Tao Te Ching had also gotten really influenced by Buddhism and shamanism. And so you ended up with all kinds of different varieties of Taoism, but essentially you had philosophical Taoism, which is the Taoism that came to the West and meant so much to people here, and you had practical Taoism. Practical Taoism included many of the ancient gods and many of the ancient shamanic things that we would call superstitions. So you had that.
Okay.
Meanwhile, back in India, this is quite a bit later, you had various philosophies that were flowing around, and among those philosophies came Sri Krishna of Vrindavan, and Krishna developed the idea of bhakti yoga. Yoga means to link. That's why it really amazes me when I see Jewish synagogues having yoga services, yoga classes. You can't do that.
Interesting.
Yoga is to link with these what we would call pagan gods.
Right.
But Bhakti Yoga says that the way to link to the ultimate God, the ultimate truth, is through devotion. And so the worship of the Bhakti cult or devotional Hinduism came up and is a very powerful flow to this day in India. You have the more orthodox-minded people who are studying the Shastra and who are very, very observant and very studious and that type thing. And then you have the Bhaktis who are sort of dancing on the streets, sort of like we have the Nanaks who are dancing on the streets today. And so this was a major move within especially Vaishnava Hinduism, the worshippers of Lord Vishnu. And there also developed an ancient idea from early on in the Rig Veda where a master is approached by his disciple and he says, "Master, how many gods are there?" And the master says, "Oh, there are 3,462 gods." I'm making up the numbers.
Sure.
And the student says, "So many gods, master? Really? How many gods are there?" "Oh, really? Oh, well, really, there's 3,027. "Master, come on. How many gods are there really?" "Oh, you mean really? Oh, well, really, there's 311. "Master, come on. How many gods are there?" "Don't tell anybody, but really, there's 3 gods. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva." And he thinks about that. And he says, "Master, 3? Really?" Master looks around and he says, "Ech Devata." There's only one God. So this concept of one God was manifest very early on in the cultures and the religions of India. As we say, Hasidus, and as the Kabbalists say, we believe there is Ein Sof.
Right.
But Ein Sof is beyond all conception. Ein Sof is the no thing we can't comprehend. In India, it is the neti neti. It is the not this, not that. It's beyond conception. There's some fundamental differences, in my opinion, between the actual understanding of Kabbalah and the understanding of these Vedic traditions. But they sort of have a similar root, which led me to the conclusion that when the Torah talks about the flood of Noah's day, we were all together after the flood, and we all agreed. But a mere 10 generations later, we have the Tower of Babel, and everybody is all over the chart. The people are all debating. Before the time of Noah, everyone was in it for themselves. They were violent, they were vicious, they were cruel. It was every man for himself. After the time of Noah, it was more of a communal thing. And the community was convinced that each one of the community members was a god in his own right. And so you came up with something very similar to the New Age idea today, that each one of us are gods. Neither one of those extremes worked. And when man built the tower, whether you want to take that literally or figuratively, and the tower was destroyed by Hashem and the people were cast out around the world, it would make logical sense that they would have kept many of those core beliefs with them. In India, you find clear stories of Noah and the ark. You find so many stories that we have in the Torah, and you find them in the Sumerian legends. You have all these different legends. The scholars debate which came first. Did the Sumerians have them, or did we have them, or did the Hindus have them? Where'd they come from? But it's a fact that many of these essential stories are spread throughout all the world's religions. And to me, that was fascinating. And so I spent a number of years just trying to get a handle on that and trying to see the similarities and the differences. And I got into paganism for a while and studied with Wodenwick, which is a pagan group that worships the god Woden, Wodel. Because I wanted to try to get into the spirit of those types of things. My family is Welsh, and so I was always fascinated by Celtic lore and Anwulf, Penanwif, and all the various Celtic things that were going on. Everywhere I looked, it seemed that I saw religion, that I saw belief, that I saw faith. It wasn't accurate faith. It wasn't biblical faith often, but it was faith, and it was motivating people, and it was moving people, and I wanted to know why. What do these people believe? And so after many years of studying, I finally decided to go to a regular college and get a master's degree in religious studies. For my master's degree, I translated the Srimad Bhagavad Gita into English from the original Sanskrit text. That was my master's degree. I was getting ready to go for my PhD, which I was going to write a somewhat biblical commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which I still think would have been pretty fascinating.
And explain what the Bhagavad Gita is.
Okay. According to the Sanatana Dharma, the world exists in 4 yugas or ages. The first yuga, Satya Yuga, High Yuga, Satya, is very, very long, millions of years. As humanity begins to corrupt itself, we go into Treta Yuga, the second age. And things are still pretty sweet, but not as good. And then when Treta Yuga ends, we go into Dvapara Yuga. Dvapara Yuga, the third age, is the age where we find most of the Vedic stories. If you're familiar with the Vedic stories, that's where most of them you will find, especially in the latter end of that. Then, roughly 5,000 years ago, something happened. There were 2 families who lived somewhere in the neighborhood of what today we would call Delhi. There was the Pandavas and there was the Kauravas. Sri Krishna was believed to be the supreme personality of Godhead. He was an incarnation of the god Vishnu. And he came down as a great wise man. And he was teaching the Pandavas, and they were all embracing him. And this is when Bhakti really began to flourish according to the traditions. But as the war kept coming up, Arjun, who is the lead charioteer for the Pandavas, he was also the youngest, but he came to Sri Krishna and he asked his father, he says, "Father, ask Sri Krishna to fight for us, because if he fights for us, because he's God, right, we're sure to win." So Krishna, who is also a mighty king by this point in his own right, said, you got two choices. Either I will go with you personally, and I'll give all of my armies and all of my military might over to the other side, because I'm God, I can't take sides. Or you can have my military might, and I'll go over to the Kauravas on their side. Well, the old man Pandava was pretty smart. He said, Krishna, you stay with us. Your troops can go over there. We want you. So they all met on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And Krishna rode in the chariot. He's actually the charioteer, the driver of the chariot for Arjuna, the archer. And so both lines are lined up. And Arjuna looks out, and he sees over there are his teachers and his cousins and all these relatives on both sides of the battle, and he's heartbroken. So he calls for a halt, and he drives his chariot into the center. And he says, Sri Krishna, we are about to basically kill everything I hold important. What do we do? And the Bhagavad Gita begins, Arjuna Uvacha, Arjuna said, seeing all these people on all sides, I am perplexed. Krishna then proceeds to give what is arguably one of the most poetic, moving, and beautiful religious tractates, for lack of a better word, ever spoken. It's the Bhagavad Gita. It is the yoga of how humanity links to God.
Okay.
It's part of a greater epic called the Mahabharata, which is the story of the great Bharat family, Mahabharata. So Krishna is narrating this wonderful story to everyone. And then towards the end, the decision has to be made. And so Arjuna gets into position, and the two armies collide. And it is a massive, massive war. At the end of the war, all the Pandavas except for Arjuna have been killed. All of the Kauravas have been killed except for one. So the one remaining Kaurava is over in his camp, and he's mourning the loss of everybody. And he says, those Pandavas are not going to get away with this. And so using mystical knowledge, which was really interesting, in the Gulf War, the United States developed a weapon. I saw this on the news, and I almost fainted because it sounds a lot like this. It's an energy cannon that shoots out a bolt of energy. But so the Kaurava, it's called the Brahmastra weapon. And the Kaurava sends out his Brahmastra weapon, and it goes arching up through the sky over to where the Pandavas are. Arjuna realizes what's happening. And so Arjuna creates his own Brahmastra weapon. And as the two meet in midair, they explode, and they melt the firmaments of the heavens and the earth. And only those people who had the foresight to run into the caves and underground were able to survive. Most everybody died.
That's getting kind of creepy.
Now, it is. Now, to me, studying the world religions at the time, when I first heard this story, I was still quite young, but I could almost picture Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, walking out of one of those caves about 5,000 years ago.
Wow.
And wouldn't this answer an awful lot of questions? How science says the earth has been here for millions of years, but the Bible says a little over 5,000.
Right.
So we're getting towards 6,000, I suppose. 57, 77, or whatever it is. So I'm being inundated with the similarities of all of these stories. But the one thing that hit me was that as I met people, because I traveled the world, I hitchhiked across Europe, I went to India, I traveled everywhere that I could go. I would hear about a teacher, and I had to go there and find out for myself. And what I discovered was that people who practice each of these religions seems to have been achieving something. There was happiness, there was joy, there was meaningfulness. But the people who would piecemeal the different religions, right, they liked the way the Hindus did this, and they liked the way the Shaivas did that, and they liked the way the Christians do this, and the Jews do that, and they took our Kabbalah and reworked it into something very different. As people started doing that, the result was confusion, because they had lost the foundational principle of each one of those religions.
Right.
So I said, well, what's the foundation of truth? The three major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all share the story of Avraham and his revelation. And so I studied that. And as you know, Avram, as a young boy, his father Terah made idols for a living. Avram goes into his father's shed, according to our teachings, and he saw all of these idols sitting around the building. And whether you want to call it inspiration from God, creativity, pick your terminology, he picked up his father's sledgehammer that he used for smashing the rocks, and he destroyed every idol in the place. And then he put that hammer into the hand of this one big God. His father comes back and he sees the destruction. You have wiped out a year's income here, because he was in it for the money. Right. What have you done? So Avram says, well, Father, the gods all started debating, and this one said he was the most beautiful, and this one said he was the most powerful, and this one said, well, I'm a god of the sun, well, I'm a god of the moon, well, I'm a god of the herds. And they had this huge fight, and that big one over there picked up your hammer and went and slaughtered all the other ones.
Right.
And Terah says, you think I was born yesterday? These things are made out of stone, wood, hay, stubble. They can't do that. So Avram says, then why do you worship them?
Beautiful.
And when Avram realized the truth that rationally, logically, there can only be one God, Hashem blessed him with that realization and promised that through his child, through Sarah, Hashem would bless the world.
Right.
And so that path has blessed the world more than any other path in history, in pretty much any way you can think of it. And it remains not much bigger population-wise than it was way back there in the time of Moses, when the people went before the sacred mount and said, we will accept your Torah, us and our generations. The numbers are amazingly close to how many Jews are left today and how many Jews were at Mount Sinai. Right. And this people survived and thrived and impacted the world more than any other people in history. Yeah, I realized that Judaism is based not on faith, it's based on established fact. But fact without faith, without emunah, is weak. Mm-hmm. And so when I learned the Bel Shem Tov, something clicked, and I just said, this is Derech Hashem, this is the way of God.
Wonderful. Well, I'll tell you what.
So that's sort of a basic walkthrough.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. I really appreciate. Again, I can't stress that enough. That you were. I really, really admire the fact that this was not achieved from an academic level. I really do. That's just, to me, it makes the whole thing, the whole story is just that much richer because of that. You were really trying to find it. Right. You know, but like you were saying, there were people extrapolating or extracting from little pieces here and there from different religions, and makes, you know, I had saw a story one time, I think it was on a YouTube video or something, I can't remember where I saw it from, but there was this family who this poor family, the mother was just an old snob, that the father was a butthead, and they were always yelling at the kids, and I was grumpy, squinted eyebrows all the time, and always just grouchy. Well, the kids decided, they were not teenagers, they were like young adults, decided it would be a funny joke to get their mom and dad a fake lottery ticket for her, I guess it was her birthday or something. And the lottery ticket, of course, they didn't actually, they were instructed you couldn't cash it in for like a week, but it was like a winning lottery ticket. And since they were poor, this thing was like for like, I don't know, $50,000 or some ridiculous number. And all of a sudden, she scratched this thing off and saw that she had won. It looked like she had won $50,000, and man, she instantly changed. What she believed about that fake thing changed her life instantaneously. So when people tell me, you know, I believe in Jesus because he changed my life, I'm like, that doesn't mean anything. You know, just like this fake lottery ticket, it doesn't have to be real. What depends is how you feel about that. What you choose to believe about that is what changes you. You know, right. And so as people seek out these things, they've got to get out of that path. Would you agree, of trying to find self-seeking pleasure from it, but just go for the truth only? So it's very unfortunate.
And the thing to me with Christians, I think more than anybody else, is that their whole claim is that Yeshua or Jesus was the Messiah.
Right.
If you accept the prophecies of the Tanakh, we have prophets, and Christians accept that we have prophets, and that those prophets were inspired by God to teach us. If you read what those prophets said, and I have a whole section with 30 or 40 prophecies that Jesus didn't fulfill.
Mm-hmm.
If you read what the prophets say, he wasn't the Messiah.
Right. Right.
Anyone who is accepted as the Messiah and then dies was not the Messiah, because the Messiah is not going to die. He's going to fulfill all these requirements.
First, right.
So I don't see how a person can really be consistently a Christian once they study the prophecies.
I'm surprised at how many people I'm running into on a regular basis that when I mention to them, that Jesus is not the Messiah prophesied from the Old Testament, they're like, "What do you mean prophesied in the Old Testament?" So many Christians, I would go as far as to say at least maybe 60 to 70% of all the ones that I've met, they don't even know anything about the Old Testament. They don't know that it was prophesied. They just know the New Testament said, "Here he is," and that's why I come to church. They don't even know anything about the Old. And so it's really sad they fall prey to that without actually knowing why they're supposed to believe that. So
that's very true. You remind me of a funny story. Back when I was studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, I was going door to door with them, and me and this guy, Ted was his name. We go up to a door, knock on the door, and the guy opens the door. And I guess the magazine the Watchtower probably had a headline, "Did you know God has a name?" But he says that, "Did you know that God has a name?" The guy says, "Well, yeah, God's name is God." And so the witness shares with him what they believe the name of God is. Of course, that's actually not the accurate name of God. But the man says, "Well, that's not my Bible." And so he says, "Well, do you have a Bible?" And he says, "Yes, I do. Just a second." And he goes and he gets his Bible and he comes back with it and says, "Here's my Bible, King James." So he opens up to Exodus 6:3, and it says, "I appeared unto Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob by the name of El Shaddai, but by my name, sacred name,
right.
I was not known to them." And the guy looked at it and tore the page out of his own Bible.
Whoa.
And said, "It's not there anymore."
Oh,
and slammed the door in our face.
Wow. Unbelievable.
And that was just so typical for the way a lot of these people react to
gosh.
me when I say the Bible says the Messiah has to bring all the Jews back to Israel, has to build the temple, and all these things.
Shlomo,
they don't want to hear it.
It's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to some feedback from all you viewers out there. If you want to do some more shows on this and make this a mini-series and cover each one, maybe do 15-minute segments, 30-minute segments, however long it takes, let us know. Send me a message on Facebook. If you'll subscribe to the website, you can comment under the video there, and you can also just kind of follow us along, like I said, on Facebook before. So like the Facebook page and follow along there. Also go to Shlomo's allfaith.com website, and also if you search YouTube at All Faith Vids, I'm going to put that up on your overhead right now. All Faith Vids, probably going to cover up my face. There it is right there. All Faith Vids on YouTube. Just search it up just like it says, All Faith Vids on YouTube, and Shlomo Phillips will be the very first one that pops up there. Click on there. You can check out the videos there and like those if you like. And but as
check me out on Facebook too, Shlomo Phillips on Facebook.
Wonderful. Well, Shlomo, it's been great. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you all for tuning in. It's been a pleasure, and we will see you later. Shalom and Shabbat Tov, everybody. Take care.